August is here, and that means it's time for another DC Dark Legion tier list. I think it's safe to say that the meta has really changed this time around. The Superman family has, for me at least, changed the way I view a lot of the game modes and my approach for the game as well, because I invested pretty heavily into those champions. But I think you'll be surprised at some of the other picks that I've made for moving a few champions up and down in the tier list. And we'll also talk about a few champions that I'm looking at making adjustments to in the future, or we're at least kind of considering doing some additional testing to see whether our rankings might be a little bit off. We obviously got Ra's al Ghul and Talia al Ghul in the last few weeks, so those have been kind of the newest champions to come into the bleed since Superman family. We have global launch players finally getting their hands on Hawkgirl, so there's definitely going to be some continued shifts and some lessons that we can learn as more people acquire some of these champions and put heavy investment into them. And one administrative note that I'll point out before we get into the actual tier list, I've seen a lot of chatter out there about the reliability of opinions on champions, especially coming from the early servers. And I would just say, I welcome opinions from people all across the game, and it is really helpful to kind of get that nuance from the different, there's sometimes there's a completely different meta in a server than others. We've seen servers where everyone invested heavily into Joker and Arkham. We've seen a bunch of the global launch servers heavily invest into Legion of Doom, for example. So, we're going to see some of those pocket metas, and I would really appreciate if you guys can reach out to me, whether it be in comments on these videos or join my Discord channel and talk to me there. Shoot me a DM. Let me know how you've invested into certain champions and how well that's panned out for you. In particular, opinions from people who are min-maxers or whales. When I say min-maxers, like a light spender who invested in only one team, but they feel really proficient with it. So I really rely on getting that feedback, because sometimes I don't have champions built out well enough for my opinion to really hold the kind of weight that I want it to. But I think I can be the proxy for the opinions of others who have built these champions out. I have a few whales that I already talked to that invest in pretty much every champion that comes to the game, and their feedback and testing is really helpful. We kind of sit down sometimes and have them test out different team comps and approaches to the game in various game modes, and I think that helps a lot. But I need more people to reach out and send me their comps, and we can talk a little bit more about those things. And with that out of the way, let's jump straight into the tier list. And you'll notice we have a few new additions to the tier list. We also have a number of champions that have moved up and down this time around. There were some others that I was looking at moving around, but I ultimately made the decision to kind of keep it where it's at. And again, we'll talk about some of those champions that I am monitoring. The new champions that have come to the tier list this time are Krypto, Superboy, and Ra's al Ghul. You'll notice that Supergirl is not new. She was featured on the July tier list. And you'll also notice that Talia al Ghul is not present on this tier list. And I do that for quality control reasons, because while I do have her in my roster now, I haven't invested heavily into her, and in fact, most players have not had a chance to heavily invest in her and test her yet. I have seen some testing from Whale, who had her, I believe, around the purple star range when he was doing the testing, and we've definitely seen some testing on Ra's al Ghul at the highest level, at least some preliminary testing in several of the game modes. So I did include Ra's, and you'll be happy to see Talia in the September version of the tier list. Basically, if a champion comes to the bleed in the last week of any given month, that's a good indication that you're not going to see them on the tier list. So let's go ahead and jump into these. And I think the way we're going to do this one is, in the past, I've talked about all the S tier and A plus tier champions. I'm going to stick to just the S tier champions this time in terms of kind of the more in-depth analysis. And then again, we're going to talk about any champion that I have moved up or down. So let's jump straight in with Supergirl. Supergirl is a champion that, I've talked about this before. When she first came out, we had her ranked pretty low, and there weren't really heavy expectations around the champion. The way her kit was working and the way we were testing Supergirl, even people who had her heavily invested at the time were just not getting good results out of her. Now, obviously, we knew that there was going to be some sort of, like the champions that came to the Superman family were going to have that Krypton energy mechanic. And we knew that there was going to be an opportunity to get her damage a little bit higher. But I don't think anyone expected at that time that it would be possible for her to be one of the best champions in the game. Clearly, with hindsight being 2020, we know now that she is one of the best champions in the game when fully invested. And I have her ranked in S tier. And as you'll remember from the prior tier list, I've started trying to stack rank them from left to right as, strongest to weakest for that tier ranking. It's not always going to be perfect, but I'm trying to do a little bit more of that. So I think Supergirl, when heavily invested, is currently probably the best champion in the game, if not really close. The big issue with Supergirl, or the elephant in the room for anyone who's looking to invest into her, is she does require Krypto in the roster. Like, at a bare minimum, she needs Krypto and, to an extent, Superman, because she needs just to cycle through to get to the end of Krypton energy as quickly as possible. But she really also needs Superboy. Now, I've had a few people ask in Justice League of Discord and some of the other communities that I'm in, can you pull for Supergirl without being able to pull for Superboy? And I've went back and forth on this, but I think the answer is no. You shouldn't, if you want to be efficient, pull for Supergirl if you're not going to try to get Superboy to at least 5 white stars where he's kind of somewhat functional. It's kind of a similar situation to Constantine and Zatanna. But you really need Supergirl, Krypto, and Superboy in the same squad if you want to see good results. You can still pull for her, but if you're not able to get her to that 3rd level of Krypton energy as quickly as you can, then you're just not going to be able to get to those damage numbers that you're seeing in a lot of videos and a lot of people putting out there. I just scored, I think, 200 million damage in the murder machine, and that was thanks to Supergirl today. So she was doing somewhere between 15 million and 20 million per ult towards the end of that battle, just because she was ramped up by Krypto and Superboy. And I do have I have Superboy's legacy, I have Supergirl's legacy, and I have Superman's legacy. So pretty well invested on my Superman family to get her where she needs to be. Sorry about that. I'm testing a new overlay here for the tier list, and I'm trying to make sure that the champion is displayed on screen as I'm talking about them. So we missed Supergirl, but I'll try to do it for the rest of the champions that we go through. Now, the next champion to talk about is Nightwing. I still think Nightwing is the best assassin class champion in the game, but with Raish coming into the game and Talia coming into the game, we have this League of Assassins team forming up now. There are some question marks. I think that right now, Raish is at least on par with Nightwing. I think Nightwing is probably a little bit better. And I also believe that Nightwing is going to be more plug and play, and he's probably going to work in way more game modes. And that's why I would pit Nightwing against Ra's al Ghul any day if we're talking about all game modes in the game. And that's why I have Nightwing still ranked at S tier. So we'll keep monitoring, that situation and see what some of these other assassins are able to do. We know that Raish can do incredible work in Meta Brawl, but I don't think he's going to do well at all in PvE. I think Talia actually gets the nod for League of Assassins PvE side. And I did it again. So here's Nightwing on screen. We're going to get this right eventually, but we'll go ahead and switch over to Sinestro. So Sinestro is another interesting champion. He's one that is, I think, probably tapering off a little bit just because of power creep, but he is undeniably an incredible champion just because he can put out a ton of single target burst, and his ultimate is also able to be a semi AoE. He's able to do a massive amount of single target damage, and then it kind of spreads out to a couple of other targets. So Sinestro is really, really good in PvP. He's also fairly efficient in several of the combat cycle bosses, and he's going to do really well in Training Simulator. I really like single target ranged champions like Sinestro, like Green Arrow, because in certain situations in Training Simulator, you're able to target specific champions with them from across the map. You can't really do that with many of the other champions. You know, like Superman has to be within range of the champion to be able to target them. So if you have a really, really high investment Superman, but you're going up against like a 2 or 3 Deathstroke team or something like that in Training Simulator, you may not be able to jump over to where those Deathstrokes are and try to peel some of that damage off of whatever champion's getting hit. So I really like Sinestro for those types of situations. And again, even with the meta changes with Superman family and now Raish and Talia coming into the game, I still think that Legion of Doom is, if not still the best PvP team, one of the best. They're definitely top 3, no matter how you swing it. And until there's a team that can come around and definitively dethrone them, I think Sinestro is going to stay in S tier, or at a bare minimum A+. But for right now, keeping him in S tier. We've got Green Lantern, as always. Obviously, we have the caveat that he is incredibly pay to win, but I still think he is one of the best, if not the best, healer in the game. We could probably start questioning that with Starfire and Krypto, especially with Krypto, but Green Lantern just continues to be a heavy hitter, especially for those who can afford to get him to higher stars. I do have him at 4 blue now, and I'm trying to push for that 5th blue star, and then hopefully get him into purple stars as quickly as I can, because, you know, I can definitely see the difference as I get him to higher star levels. And we know that purple stars is where you really start to see that magic happen with kind of the stat upgrades for these champions. So he's still an S tier champion. He still costs as much as a Toyota Camry. So what I'm really happy and excited about is that we now have 2 more champions that are S tier, I think, for your healer situation, that kind of make it a little bit easier for you to invest in a champion that's going to give you a lot of bang for your buck. And we'll talk about those in just a second. Now, I talk a ton about Superman on my channel. I think I have managed to get Superman to 1 red star, and I'm super stoked about it. Definitely had to sell my soul to get there. But the single target damage that a red star Superman can do is just really, really good. And I was talking on our podcast with Unstable Gamer a couple of weeks ago about the idea of moving Superman down to a plus tier, but I just can't do it yet. I don't think there's a reason to. Clearly, he can't do as much damage in combat cycle as Supergirl, as Nightwing, Constantine, but he still can hold his own in literally every game mode. He's really good in PvP. He's great in Training Simulator. And it's just hard to move him out of S tier right now because of all that. Just a really, really solid team. He's got MetaHuman tag, Justice League. He's got the Superman family tag. And he's getting used in pretty much everything that I do in the game right now. So I highly recommend people build him. He is high investment, I will say that. That's one of the things that, you know, we talk about several champions in the game, is that, you know, sometimes you can get away with just having a champion at purple stars. I think like Nightwing or Sinestro is a good example there, but Superman, you really want to get him as well built as you can. And I think like yellow or red stars is going to be kind of like what you should be shooting for. Like try to get him on a rerun and get there if you're a spender. If you're light spend, I think you can make a three blue star Superman work, and he's going to do really well for you. Like he'll get you to 1,000 in Training Sim pretty easily. And I think if you go after Supergirl really hard, like later on down the line, you 100% will have a solid Superman at the blue star level. Some people disagree with me there, but I mean, I did it for months. So I think you can definitely get away with it, but higher star is going to be better. And you have to have his legacy piece. There's several champions we'll talk about where you have to have their legacy piece for them to work. I will say, if we can rewind really quickly, Supergirl, you must have her legacy piece if you're going to invest into her, and then Superman as well. And we'll talk about a couple more that are like that as we move down the line. Next up is Constantine. Now, I have Constantine moved a little bit further down the line. I think with some of these newer high damage champions, some of these assassin class champions coming in that can do a ton of damage, but also with the introduction of Supergirl, Constantine has fallen off a little bit. He's one of the highest investment champions that I have in my account, and I love Constantine and the Justice League Dark team. So I still feel like he is 100% locked into S tier. Obviously he has that glaring weakness in PvP with Deathstroke, but 100% still meta for PvP. And I would say if you like Justice League Dark, you should be going after this group and making them kind of the staple of your team. I've got a bleed strategy guide that I need to be updating in the next few weeks. You'll probably see that come out at some point in August. But, I recommend a couple of different ways that you can build your account if you're starting from scratch. And Justice League Dark and Constantine is one of the recommendations that I have. And that's not going to go away anytime soon. So his legacy piece is really good, but you don't have to have it. There are other ways that you can ramp spiritual damage for Constantine, but you won't regret investing into his legacy piece because you do get a third AoE, and it's just like it all kind of builds on itself, and he can take teams out really, really fast. So he's great for training sim. He's great for PvP because of that. But then, obviously he just can ramp his damage over time in a battle. So combat cycle works out really well for Constantine too. Well, let's talk about one of those other healers I mentioned that's not necessarily dethroning Green Lantern, but at least making it easier for you to build your account if you can't spend. And that's Starfire. Now, obviously she is a late stage champion in the bleed calendar, so it's probably going to take you 4 to 6 months before you even see Starfire show up. But if you're patient and you're big into Teen Titans and Outsiders, I think you'll enjoy having Starfire in your roster. She's definitely a champion like Supergirl and Superman, where you pretty much have to have her legacy piece if you want her kit to work the way it should. She's an incredible healer. She works really well with, as I mentioned, those Teen Titans champions. We don't have a lot of Outsiders yet as of the making of this video, so that tag is kind of obsolete at this point, but you can definitely squeeze her into a lot of different teams. She is a energy wielder, and she also does spiritual damage. A lot of people have been using her with Nightwing, and I've also seen some chatter out there about how she clashes with Nightwing's kit because half the time her heals don't go off on him when he gets too far away from her. But there are ways around that. And also, even with that being the case, she's still good for the team as a whole. And, I would just say there really aren't many other options for Nightwing in terms of healers as it is. So you're kind of really stuck with Starfire in a lot of situations. But I don't think that's a bad thing. Again, we'll see if we get a Bat Family healer in the next few months. We know that there's going to be a Bat Family event and some other things around that coming into the game before the end of the year. So, we may not be talking about Starfire and Nightwing in the same sentence in the next few months. But for right now, she's worth using with that team and 100% worth building when you can get to her. And the last S tier champion that we're going to talk about is Krypto. And, this is like the first time I think that Krypto has been introduced into a game. Had a chance to watch the new Superman movie over the weekend, and I really loved it. And Krypto was heavily featured in that, so it was really cool. But Krypto is like the kit design is really, really well done here. It's fun, it's interesting. There's one issue that I have with his kit, and I almost put him in A plus because of it. When you're in Meta Brawl, which you can't control your champion movements or anything like that, for some reason they've decided to basically put a pause whenever the ultimate is available before Krypto sets it off. And I don't know if that's for balancing purposes or like what the reasoning is. I did ask the Nairobot why, and the response was essentially that I guess like the computer is designed to try to be efficient with when they use the ult. But I can tell you it is not efficient at all in Meta Brawl for Krypto to hold off on trying to stun the enemy, especially with if you're going up against a Deathstroke or a Nightwing, you're just going to die. And that's something I've expressed to the devs is kind of the frustration around that one specific element. But as far as combat cycle, training sim, like pretty much every element of the game, and even in Meta Brawl, in most fights, it's not as significant, again, unless you're going up against that Deathstroke. But Krypto is just an incredible healer. He is really the engine that makes Superman family work. Like, you have to have him if you want to run Superman family no matter what. But he also is just really, really good with a lot of other teams as well, just because of the way really just the stun. So, you have kind of that Atom stun, but then Krypto doesn't kill himself and go off the battlefield. And then also he has the added effect of actually healing the team. So, just an incredible support champion. And again, I kind of waffle on S and A plus, but for right now, we're putting him in S tier just because of the impact that I've seen and the way he works with Superman family. We're getting into the changes in the tier list. So the ones that I've moved up and down, Martian Manhunter is the first one. And you can see that he went from A to the very top of A plus. I heavily considered moving him to S tier, but I have a few reservations there. I just don't like. I see the vision for Martian Manhunter being a broken champion with the way counterattack works, but it's just not quite there yet. He is really, really good in Meta Brawl or just in PvP in general. He can make a lot of AoE teams pay. True counter to your Justice League Dark team with Constantine. But anything else that can do a lot of AoE, he typically makes them pay. So I think Supergirl probably is going to be scared of Martian Manhunter to an extent as well. But Martian Manhunter is the fourth champion that we've talked about today that does require their unique legacy item in order to for you to invest heavily into them, and that's the Karoo pendant. And not only is that a required legacy piece, but I also think, and I talked to a couple of whales about this as well, you pretty much have to invest in the first two levels, like all the way to 5 blue stars on the Karoo pendant, before you feel like you're really getting what you should out of Martian Manhunter. So, really high investment champion here. But if you can do that investment, he is an incredible champion. He's one of my favorites. I'm actually in Meta Brawl and some other areas, I'm using Martian Manhunter as my fifth. I think on Devastator, I've been using him as a fifth, at least testing him out there, just because they made the changes that make the counterattack actually work against Devastator now. But, that's kind of his weak point is combat cycle. Like, there's several bosses where you just really wouldn't use him because you can find a better option for your fifth champion, especially on Superman family. But Martian Manhunter, one of my favorite DC champions or DC characters of all time, and also, one of my favorite champions in the game with just the way his kit is designed. I just wish we'd get a little bit more DPS out of him, but I know that, a lot of his kit is designed around just kind of like countering a couple of those AoE teams. So it is what it is, but I'm happy I can finally put him into A plus tier. He belongs up there with the best. Joker has finally fallen from S tier, and he's a champion that we've said from day one is just incredibly impactful, especially since they changed his kit, which that was done ages ago. Like I think it may have actually happened before global launch, but they changed his kit and kind of the way his damage over time works. And he can just really, really ramp up damage on some of the combat cycle bosses. I've seen some crazy damage figures on a couple of the CC bosses because of the way that works. And so that's one of the reasons why we just felt like we had to keep him in S tier. But you know, we've noticed from pretty much all across the board, all the different servers and like, you know, length of time that a server's been open, that Joker just, you know, isn't really used heavily in Meta Brawl. And I don't like, he's one of the worst good champions in the game in terms of training simulator. So I don't want to call him a one-trick pony, because I think that Joker has, you know, he has a spot in the meta, and clearly we're keeping him in A+ tier, which means that he's still an incredibly great champion and worth investing in, depending on kind of like what your account goals are. But definitely a champion that as we get more power creep, as we get more champions loaded into the game, he's going to have more and more of a niche use. And so that's why I've went ahead and moved him into A+ tier. Superboy, we've already talked about a little bit, but we'll spend a couple of seconds on him. Obviously, he is a support champion. He's Superman family, and he is kind of required use for if you really want your Superman family to work the way it should. I'm putting him in A+ tier to start out with, because I think he offers a lot of use to a lot of other teams as well, just because he can ramp attack. You know, his kit, his ultimate is specifically designed to ramp up Supergirl's damage, but if she's not present, he will prioritize the next highest attack on the team. So I've seen people using him with Nightwing comps and other comps out there if they have him invested. I know there's a couple of whales who are using him with their Nightwings for sure. But he's definitely one of the best support champions in the game at the moment, especially if you're able to get his 6-string, his unique legacy item. That's just going to make him even stronger. We moved Zatanna up, I believe, from A tier to A+ tier. And she is at the bottom of A+ tier. She's still kind of like on that borderline. But I thought it was worth moving her up to A+ tier because, you know, I'm starting to try to acknowledge the fact that just because a supporter isn't doing a ton of damage doesn't mean that they're not important to a team. You know, obviously that kind of goes without saying, but Zatanna is a champion that if you have her at high investment levels, she really sets off the Justice League Dark team. I mean, she can even not necessarily tank, but in some of the Realm of Fate for Justice League Dark, Forest of the Fallen, you can put her in the front line, and she's able to sustain damage long enough to ramp up Constantine's attack and win those fights. So just her usability in all game modes makes her worth adding to A+ tier, along with Flash and Superboy as, in my opinion, the best supports in the game, like non-healer supports, I should say. Pains me to say this, but because Poison Ivy has been one of my favorite champions in the first 6 months since I started playing the soft launch of the game. I guess actually it's been a little over 7 months now since soft launch happened, but Poison Ivy is still an incredibly good champion. The problem is that she gets countered by a lot of stuff. In particular, she's going to get countered by, or she's going to get countered in Meta Brawl by several different things. Like, she's really just not even worth using in Meta Brawl at all, especially at the highest levels. You could probably get away with it at elite rank, like some of the lower ranks. You could probably use her. Once you start competing in Master and Grandmaster, you're just not going to be able to use Poison Ivy without getting completely smoked. No usability in Meta Brawl, and you know, depending on how you have your roster set up, there's probably going to be better options in a lot of the combat cycle bosses. There are a few that she excels at. I think she does fairly well against Drowned, and there's a couple of others that I think she's worth using in, but you know, pretty decent in combat cycle. And I would also say, you know, depending on the training sim level you're on, she can offer a decent amount of usability over there as well. So she kind of hits 2 of the 3 in terms of, like the holy trinity for the game, I think. And for that reason, I think she's still, worth building, especially early on, but she tapers off, and she's not worth investing too far, once you have access to some of the other champions that are around. But, given the state of the game right now, we don't have a ton of healers still. Obviously, we got Krypto, and Krypto probably just straight up replaces Poison Ivy, unless you just have like a heavy focus on Legion of Doom and Arkham. But even then, I might end up using Krypto over Poison Ivy. All right, Wonder Woman, being a champion, being the first legendary to mythic Ascension champion, we had high expectations for what she'd be able to do as a mythic champion. And I would say she is way better now than she was as a legendary, but her kit really didn't change. She gets that automatic stun, but if you invested in her force, you were going to get that anyway. And so I haven't really noticed like a huge difference in the way her kit works and her performance. Definitely was able to get a few more levels in the Justice League Dark training sim, but overall, I just think that we're going to see power creep push certain champions over Wonder Woman as far as like who's the best tank out there. And I think that a champion like Fate, like Dr. Fate and Scarecrow, both of those champions have better utility and better plug and play viability than Wonder Woman. She's still incredibly plug and play viable. And honestly, if you're a light spender or if you don't spend at all, if you're true free to play, this is the champion you want to build, because you can do that legendary to mythic ascension, and you're going to have a really, really solid mythic champion whenever you do that. So definitely, I don't want people to get the sense that I'm saying she's not worth building. Like, she's still an A tier champion. It's just that I think there's better stuff available long term for your account than pushing too far into Wonder Woman. Batgirl is a champion that I've kind of had, like, she's been suppressed in the rankings for quite a while. I think that with Nightwing becoming more and more prominent in the meta over the last couple of months, she's proven her worth. Like, if you run Nightwing, you kind of have to run Batgirl. And since Nightwing is an S tier champion and Batgirl can do all of this ramp of crit rate, you really have to build Batgirl as far as you can if you're heavily invested into Nightwing. So for that reason, I think she deserves to be in that A tier, because you can use Nightwing in every game mode, and you're going to probably be using Batgirl wherever you put your Nightwing. So she's worth doing it. You can get a massive amount of crit, especially if you're able to pull off a Teen Titans and Bat Family synergy team with your Nightwing. You're going to be feeling pretty good about what your damage capabilities are. So for that reason, I moved her up. Just a speed run on some of the champions that I moved down. I moved Harley down a little bit further. I still think that she is incredible champion for early game in your account, especially since you now get Harley's hammer for free as part of the 7-day login rewards if you're starting from scratch. So I still, even though I've put her in B tier, that's because she does taper off later into the game. So, if you're a light spender or a whale, you probably have already forgotten about your Harley unless you're invested in the Birds of Prey. But if you are a free-to-play player, Harley is still going to be a champion you 100% should be building along with Poison Ivy. And again, I don't want you to get like the impression that I'm saying this champion is trash. Like, Harley is a pretty solid champion. I think all these champions that are in B tier, very solid, great to build for your account, especially in the first few months. And they're definitely going to help you out. But over time, you will end up replacing them with the champions that you want to build that are going to be better for your roster. I think the same thing goes for Mera. We've gotten to this point now where really no legendary champion should be higher than B tier. We still have Green Arrow up there, but I think he still offers a lot of viability for that single target damage. Mera is an incredible healer, but she just heals. Like, she doesn't really offer any other ways to support your team. And I think for that reason, she definitely tapers off because all the, again, with power creep, all these newer healers that are coming out offer things for your team that are much more beneficial than just what Mera is able to do. We see a lot of people early on in the first few months of their account using her to, great efficiency, especially if you put a lot of force investment into her. So definitely a champion that you should be building in your account, but just one that I think over time is probably not going to be used by your roster, at least not until we get more Atlanteans into the game. I did move several champions down into the C tier and D tiers. We'll talk about them for a second. And, a couple of these, it kind of pains me to send them down, but we just have all these champions coming into the game that I think are more beneficial or impactful when invested in than some of these legendaries and early game champions that you can get. And so, I had to make the decision to move Red Hood and Black Adam down into C tier. I still think they're good champions to invest in for your first starter team whenever you're first starting out in the game. And if you're a free-to-play player, you may be forced to invest heavily into these champions because you're just not getting the bleed pulls that you want to get. So, I think the way we have to view these, this C tier is these are champions that do have some niche uses, or they can be used if that's literally the only thing that you have. They're not, it's not like there's a blight on the champion and they should never be used ever, which is some of the D tier champions. But C tier is just, build at your own risk. If you just have to build one of these champions as far as you can get them, that's fine. I've seen people heavily invest into Red Hood, and we might get a mythic ascension for Red Hood in the next month or two. So, we may very well be moving him right back out of C tier. But I think for right now, Red Hood, Black Adam, and Two-Face are all down in that tier. Two-Face is a different story. I just don't see a spot for Two-Face in an Arkham team. You don't see a lot of Arkham out there in the wild for Combat Cycle or Meta Brawl. And, so he probably does offer some utility in like the Arkham training sim. Same thing with Penguin, who I've moved down to D tier. But there's just not enough utility or impact in using Two-Face over other available champions. So we had to move him down as well. And then I mentioned Penguin. I've seen or talked to some whales who are planning to build Penguin, and I'm curious if there's some sort of meta comp out there that we haven't thought about yet that you can use him for. But, he offers some viability in a couple of the combat cycle bosses, in training sim, but just not a champion that's impactful in any of the game modes that he's in right now. So for that reason, we did move him down to D tier. I don't think he's worth investing in right now. And the last champion that we moved down is Arsenal. I have a personal vendetta about Arsenal. I invested a ton to get Arsenal to, I think, 4 blue stars. I used like pretty much all of the mythic selector shards that I had, and I really wish I could get all of those back because he is awful. I don't know if maybe this is another Supergirl situation where we just don't see the vision and, they don't have all the champions in the game that are going to make him better. But as of right now, I'm pretty sure a wet noodle could do more damage than Arsenal can. He just is not it. I wish he was, because I, put a decent amount of resources into upgrading my Outsiders team, but he's just not there. And, I'm curious if anybody has invested past 4 or 5 blue stars. I think I have him at 5 blue stars. Let me check. Yeah, he's at 5 blue stars now. And I'm curious, like, let me know in the comments if you have a really well-built Arsenal and he's doing better for you, but just don't think he's it. That's it for the tier list. We have gone way over on time here, so I apologize about that. But I do want to make sure that I'm giving you the best information that I possibly can about these champions. And there were a lot that either people had questions about or that have changed. So I'm hoping maybe the next tier list isn't going to be quite as many changes as this one. I hope you enjoyed this iteration of the tier list. Again, as always, we'll have the tier list itself available for download from my Discord server, as well as the official Discord server. So definitely go do that. Feel free to share it with your leagues across the game. And if you haven't done so already, consider subscribing to the channel. It definitely helps out with the algorithm. It's completely free to subscribe. You can join if you want to, but no pressure there. I just hope to see you around in the next video.